Welcome to English Country Life. We've been working with the brilliant podcasters Coffee with the Chicken Ladies. In this episode, it accompanies the roundtable where we talk about disasters and how to deal with them. Now, most people have high winds. You've possibly got a risk of flooding. You've possibly got a risk of illness yourself or even illness for your poultry. And in this episode, we're going to explore how to deal with that. Welcome, my name's Fiona. I've been talking with Chrissy and Holly, the brilliant podcasters who are Coffee with the Chicken Ladies, and I'll link to their podcasts down below. On a regular basis, we have roundtables and discuss various aspects of chicken keeping. This video accompanies the roundtable talking about disasters and how to support your poultry. Now, you may think that disasters aren't actually something that you need to deal with. However, everyone's got something. In the UK here, we've got high winds and we've got avian influenza, so chicken disease. It may be that you're in the US and you've got tornadoes to cope with, or even wildfires. And Australia has been very, very badly affected in recent years with wildfires too. In this episode, we're going to be talking about all of those aspects and contingency planning. But let's get started with the best foundation for dealing with disasters, and that's risk assessment. I'd like to introduce you to Nugget. Nugget is one of our Buff Orpingtons, and she's absolutely gorgeous. I wouldn't want anything to happen to her or any of our flock. So we as a family have sat down and completed a basic risk assessment of things which could affect us here. And I would encourage you to do the same wherever you live. Now, our risk assessment was very simple. We have got three main risks to this property and our birds. The first is high winds and storms. We're in South Lincolnshire, which is a very flat county, and wind just whips across this landscape. So we've planned for that and we've put high hedges in place. The second risk we've got is flooding. Now, this is a much lower risk because Lincolnshire is mainly a fen county, so there's lots of reclaimed land from the sea, but we also have one of the most sophisticated networks of drainage and pumping stations to prevent flood happening. And actually this land hasn't flooded since 1860, which is why we've assessed that risk as being low. And finally, the very high risk we've got at the moment is avian influenza, and this is why we're in this fully netted enclosure. But we'll cover that in a bit more detail in the next section, which is all about disease. I'm stood here in the chicken field, and as you can see, it's completely bereft of chickens, and this section is all about dealing with disease and planning for dealing with disease. And here in the UK, we've legally had to remove all the chickens and put them somewhere else, and we'll get onto that in a moment because we've got the threat of avian influenza here. But first I want to talk about human disease and how that should be planned for with disasters. Now, in recent years, human disease has become a big problem, clearly, and worldwide it's something which we need to consider. Chickens need looking after every day. Food, water, shelter, cleanliness all need to be looked after. And if you can't get out there to do it because you're ill, someone else needs to take on those tasks. Now, if you live on your own, it's a big problem, but if you're in a big family, it's less of an issue. But have a think about who can pick up that slack if you can't get out there to care for them. Do you have friends, neighbours, family who can all come in and take on that role to help you out? And of course, there's disease of poultry themselves. And as mentioned, here in the UK, we're dealing with the threat of avian influenza, and it's particularly horrible at the time of filming. We're going through the winter of 21-22, and at the time of filming, we've had 69 reported cases in the UK, and millions of chickens have been affected. and it's a horrible disease and kills poultry very, very quickly. And legally we've had to take all the chickens out of their free range field and put them in a fully netted enclosure, and the requirements say indoors or a fully netted enclosure. So they're now in this structure behind me, which is 21 metres long by 3 metres wide, and it's actually a polytunnel frame covered with bird netting. Now, because we knew that avian influenza was potentially on the horizon, we were able to put the structure up very, very quickly. But what are the threats in your area? Now, avian influenza may be a threat for you because it's spread by migratory wildfowl, and it's possible that the infected wildfowl are coming over your area. It may not be a problem, but there may be other diseases. If you're not sure what they are, check the farming press. The farming community will be the first ones to report any news, so those are the publications to have a look at to see what the threats are for you. Next section, we're going to be talking about dealing with extreme weather conditions. One of the things which we've had to plan for is extreme weather and high winds. Now, here in the UK, we don't have winds in the force of hurricanes or even tornadoes, and if you live in areas that do suffer from those, you may need to think about evacuation plans, but we'll get onto that in a later section. If you're dealing with storm force winds, as we would have to cope with here in the UK, it's a good idea to assess what the impact's going to be on your poultry. Now, for us, there's a number of things which we've done, and one of them is we've looked at all of our coops. Now, this is one of our coops, and it's got opening nest box and an opening roof, and it's possible that these will open in the wind. The wind could actually make these move. So what we have done is taken some very simple measures. You'll notice there's a latch on this roof here which just closes over, and to make sure that doesn't get blown open, we've got a little clip which holds it in place. A very, very simple solution to stop the chickens being affected by the high winds and the roof being opened. This is the main tool that we have to combat the wind at our property, and it's something worth considering where you are too. And it's high hedges. Now, we've planted them all around the property. You might want to put fences up rather than hedges, and we have had to plant the majority of these ourselves, but it's been well worth the effort. And now they're established, they do a great job of protecting not only our chickens but also our garden structures like our greenhouses and our fruit cages. They do a fantastic job. We've also considered the wind in other ways, and we've created windbreaks so the chickens can actually hide from the wind. Now, the most common direction for the wind to enter our property here is in this direction. So you'll notice that in this sand bath, which is actually just a tractor tyre filled with builder sand, there's a solid piece of wood at the back, and that stops the wind coming through, which means they can actually sit in the sand bath and get away from that wind. And of course, because it's got a roof, they can keep away from any rain too, which will be coming in this direction. You may have noticed as well there's two structures here, and these are shelters, and at the moment we've got custard inside one, and then there's marshmallow stood just inside of the other one. Now, one of them's quite lightweight, so we've put a bit of cinder block on the roof to stop that being a problem, but it works really, really well. They use both of these shelters on a regular basis, and actually this is their favourite hangout during the day, whether it's windy or not. Another aspect of extreme weather to consider is the stability of your coops. Now, we've got multiple coops here. We've got some which are heavyweight, some which are very lightweight, and this one which is roughly about medium weight. But even in high winds here, this coop has been known to move a little to one side. So now when we know a storm is coming, what we do is we anchor it to the ground. And that's a very simple process. It's stakes either side connected by a strap which goes over the roof, and that's enough to keep it in place. Now, you will need to have a look at your risk assessment that you'll have done as a result of part one, and decide actually how strong those winds are going to be and how heavyweight your coops are to decide whether you need to do that same thing. Another aspect of reviewing your coops would be planning for flooding. Now, it all depends on where you live and how extensive that risk is. Where we are, our risk would be the flooding would be extensive on the land, but it wouldn't be very deep. So these coops, which are on stilts, would be enough for the chickens to get their feet out of the wet while the flood is in place. And we can then take a little bit of time making other plans to get them off the property and get them somewhere where the land isn't flooded. Another thing you may be able to do is actually get your coops onto higher ground. So if that's an option on your property, have a look where you could resite the coops to if you need to. And of course, the extreme of that, if your flooding's likely to be extensive or very deep, is evacuation, which we'll come on to in the next section. So far in this video, we've covered risk assessment for the area that you live in. We've talked about diseases and we've talked about extreme weather, and we have talked about some mitigations and contingency plans that you can make to actually reduce the impact should those events happen. But in the extreme circumstances, there are two aspects which everyone should consider. One is the health side and one is evacuation. So let's talk about health first. Well, we would recommend that every poultry keeper keeps a basic first aid kit in place. And let's just look at wounds, for example. One of the things you should have is something to clean the wounds with, and we would use water with cotton wool, and we've also got wound spray. Once it's clean, we'll spray this on to disinfect and actually make sure that the wound has no nasties in it. And this can is already stained purple because it's a purple spray, so we have used it quite a bit. You also need something to pack the wound, to keep it covered, to make sure it's clean and dry so dirt doesn't get in and the wound's got a chance to heal. We use Millen padding and then we cover it with vet wrap, and we recommend that every poultry keeper has those in. Now, in extreme circumstances, in big disasters, it may be that you cannot leave your property. And what happens if one of your poultry has an accident, which means that you can't get it to a veterinary professional? For example, if you've got extreme weather, it is likely, for example, in high winds, that one of your birds is hit by a fallen branch or moving garden furniture. There's all sorts of possibilities with things flying around in the air. Now, in that case, you could have a chicken who's suffering quite significantly. And if you can't get to a vet, what can you do for that animal? Now, it may be at a point where you need to end that bird's suffering. Are you in a position to do that? If not, can you find someone in the local area that you can get to, even though you can't get as far as a vet, is there someone you can get to who would be prepared to help you in those circumstances? It's a really good idea to plan for that in advance. The other thing to consider is evacuation. For example, here, I said flooding is a very low risk, but if it did happen, it would be extensive, even though shallow. But we would have to get the birds off the property. Now, what we've done is over time we have kept an eye out for various carriers, and I've got two examples here. This one actually is a dog carry case, and it's fantastic. I can get a number of chickens in here for transport for a short distance, or a smaller number of chickens for transport for a longer distance, and I paid virtually nothing for this at a charity shop. It was a very, very useful bit of kit to have, and we've got 4 of these. We've also got a number of dog crates, and these are even more common, and we get these for roughly about the same price as the dog carriers, but they're significantly bigger, which is wonderful. So it's worth keeping an eye out for these over time, but it does mean that we are prepared should we ever have to leave the property and evacuate. Nuggets joined me again, and I hope you found our video helpful. If you have liked it, don't forget to give me a thumbs up down below. Don't forget to listen to Chrissy and Holly on their brilliant podcast, Coffee with the Chicken Ladies, and a link to their podcast is in the description down below. If you're not already a subscriber to our channel here, hit subscribe and the bell icon and you'll be notified of every new video as soon as it goes live. If you've got a question for me, leave it in the comments section and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But for now, thanks for watching, and it's goodbye from me and Nugget. We'll see you next time.